Why pressure makes the first answer feel true. One of the mind's most convincing mistakes happens under pressure. Something is unclear, open, unfinished. And instead of waiting for understanding, the system starts wanting an answer fast. The pressure rises. Attention narrows. The need to conclude begins to feel urgent. Then an answer appears. Maybe not the best one, not the deepest one, not the truest one, just the first one that gives shape to the pressure. And because the pressure drops, the answer immediately starts feeling right. That is the mistake. The mind confuses relief with truth. It assumes, if this settled me, it must be correct. If this reduced the strain, it must be the answer. But often, what happened is much simpler. The answer did not prove itself. It only arrived at the exact moment the system wanted the pressure to end. That timing gives it false authority. The mind does not ask, is this accurate? It feels, this lets me breathe. And once breathing returns, certainty starts borrowing the voice of truth. That is how pressure can make the first answer feel more reliable than it really is.
What makes this error so persuasive is that pressure does change something. It changes the body. The chest loosens, the mind narrows less. The inner strain drops the moment an answer appears. And because the system feels different, the answer feels different too. More solid, more believable, more final. But the answer did not become truer, it became relieving. That is the crucial confusion. Pressure creates a hunger for closure, and hunger makes the first thing that satisfies it feel more right than it really is. This is why fast conclusions can feel so intelligent, not because they were tested, because they ended the discomfort of not yet knowing. The mind feels this as confirmation, as if the answer proved itself by calming you down. But calming down is not proof. It only means the pressure stopped demanding more for a moment. That is how pressure quietly gives the first answer a weight it never actually earned. This is why pressure can make weak answers feel strangely powerful. The answer does not need to explain much. It only needs to reduce enough tension for the system to stop bracing. Once that happens, the mind starts adding meaning. See? That must be it. Now it makes sense. That's why this feels settled. But what feels settled is often only the urgency, not the question itself. The question may still be incomplete. The deeper process may still be forming. The truth may still be slower than the pressure wanted. But the mind rarely waits to see that, because the relief arrived first. And first relief has enormous persuasive force. It gives the answer a kind of emotional priority, not because it is better, because it ended the most uncomfortable part of the experience fastest. That is why pressure does not only distort timing, it distorts trust. It makes the first answer feel earned, when often it was only convenient. And once convenience starts sounding like truth, the mind becomes very easy to convince by whatever closes quickly. What makes this even harder to recognize is that pressure borrows the feeling of importance. If something feels urgent, the mind assumes it must matter deeply. If it feels immediate, it must need an answer now. This is how scale gets distorted. The pressure rises, and the first answer does not only feel relieving, it feels significant, as if the answer earned its place through the intensity of the moment. But intensity is not evidence. It is only intensity. A system under pressure will often prefer what closes quickly over what reveals honestly. That is the hidden error. The answer is not trusted because it is true. It is trusted because it arrived at the exact moment the mind could no longer bear the openness. And once that happens, the answer gains a false solidity, not from proof, from pressure finally having somewhere to go. That is why the first answer can feel so convincing, even when it is shallow.
It did not have to be right. It only had to be fast enough to end the strain.
This is why the first answer can feel cleaner than the truth. Truth is often slower. It arrives in pieces. It stays incomplete for a while. It does not always reduce tension the moment it appears. But pressure does not want something slow. It wants something usable, something that gives shape to the discomfort right now. That is why the first answer often wins. Not because it is deeper, because it is available at the exact moment the mind wants out. This is the crucial distortion. Availability starts looking like accuracy. Speed starts looking like intelligence. Closure starts looking like understanding. And once these get confused, the system becomes easy to satisfy with answers that only fit the pressure, not the process. This is why people can feel certain quickly and doubtful later. The answer worked against urgency, but not against reality. Something underneath was still unfinished, still forming, still unconvinced, still not fully represented by the answer that arrived first. That is the cost of trusting pressure too much. It makes relief feel like proof. And once relief is mistaken for proof, the mind stops looking for what is true and starts settling for what ends the strain fastest. This is why pressure does not only distort answers, it distorts trust. The moment relief appears, the mind begins trusting what relieved it, not because the answer was examined well, because the body stopped protesting. This creates a dangerous shortcut. Instead of asking whether the answer actually fits reality, the system starts asking whether it reduced the internal strain enough. If it did, it gains authority. This is how weak conclusions can become powerful so quickly, not through depth, through timing. The answer arrives at the exact moment the mind wants closure most, and because it meets that need, it begins to sound more true than it really is. This is why later doubt can feel so confusing. At first, the answer felt solid. Then time passes, pressure lowers, and something underneath starts speaking again. A hesitation, a friction, a sense that the answer closed too quickly over something that was still alive. That is the sign. Not that the mind failed, that pressure was obeyed before the process had finished revealing itself. Once this is seen, something begins to change. Not because pressure disappears, but because pressure is no longer confused with truth. You begin to notice that the first answer did not necessarily arrive because it was right. It may have arrived because the mind could no longer tolerate what was still open. That distinction matters, because once it is felt, the first answer loses some of its false authority. It may still come quickly, still feel relieving, still sound decisive, but now you do not trust its timing so blindly. You begin to ask, did this become clear, or did this simply become bearable? That question changes everything, because now relief is no longer enough to prove accuracy. The pressure may drop, but the mind no longer assumes that the answer earned the right to become truth just because it ended the strain. This is where the pattern weakens. Not when every answer comes slowly, when speed stops being mistaken for certainty, when closure stops being mistaken for clarity. And when that begins to change, something more honest appears. Not the first answer, the one that remains after the pressure is gone. That is the real difference. A pressured answer often feels true only while the system is still trying to escape what was open. But an honest answer does not need urgency to support it. It can remain even after the body softens, even after the mind quiets, even after the need to close everything quickly has passed. That is why pressure must be seen carefully, not fought, not obeyed blindly, seen. Because once it is seen,
the mind stops mistaking the end of strain for the arrival of truth. And that is where real clarity begins. Not in the first answer that made you breathe, in the one that still stands when breathing is no longer the issue. This is inner cognition.